There's a 50-day deadline for there to be an unconditional ceasefire on the Russian side. The Russians categorically said, we're not even going to consider that. And then the 50 days was turned into 10 days. And then the 10 days turned into no days. That the deadline came and went. No one talking about anything. And now that instead of talking about, I'm requiring a 30-day ceasefire, now he's just saying, let's get together and talk, and we'll just sound each other out. So even Trump's own objectives in what this round is supposed to accomplish are different, almost depending on what day we're talking about. So that's not something that's going to cause disruption, because it's just going to cause confusion, and it's not going to result in anything that's positive for any side, I don't think.
Good morning. Great to have you with us.
Certainly glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
What do you think the American mindset will be going into this meeting with President Putin? What will be going on in Trump's mind?
Well, yeah, I think it's more Trump even than it is the American mindset, because I think there's a lot of different views even within the Trump's inner circle. And really what his expectation is, I think it all boils down to, he wants the fighting to stop. And how that gets done, I think he's open to different options, because he certainly said a lot of different things, everything from a 30-day unconditional ceasefire to, well, let's just swap some territory and let's get the two sides talking. Maybe there's a deal, maybe there's not. Everything is focused on ending the conflict. And I think he doesn't seem to be locked into any one way to do it, which is not necessarily a good thing.
No, and that's what has concerned European allies and certainly the Ukrainians. But it seems over the last 24 hours that the American president has tried to offer some reassurance.
Well, he has, and that's also somewhat puzzling, because on the one hand, for example, after the meeting between the European heads of state and Trump and Zelensky on Wednesday, Macron came out and said that the president had said, yes, territorial integrity and security guarantees, those are on the table. Zelensky said something the same in his remarks when he came out as well. But President Trump had previously said, yeah, we're just going to swap some territories. And he said nothing about any kind of security guarantees. To the contrary, when he has spoken on the topic, he said there will definitely be no NATO. We're not going to provide any kind of security guarantees. So that's very much up in the air, because you have one party with the Europeans and the Ukrainians saying one thing, Trump saying something different, or just not commenting on it. So when you're talking about that kind of disunity and apparent working in opposite directions before he goes in to talk to the Russians, who are very much of one set and one mind and very consistent in their goals, I'm not sure that's really given a lot of optimism that there's going to be a good outcome.
Could that be part of the Donald Trump playbook, which is, and he's said this in the past, when there is a stalemate or seemingly no progress, you need to disrupt, you need to go into a situation and not be predictable. Do you think that's what he might be trying to do here?
Well, look, a lot of people ascribe that to him, and that may work in some contexts, but then there also comes a time to when you have to be crystal clear and you have to be locked in on what your objectives are, and you can't just be chaotic and going around sending different signals. I mean, just look at this last little phase here. You had Trump said there's a 50-day deadline for there to be an unconditional ceasefire on the Russian side. The Russians categorically said, we're not even going to consider that. And then the 50 days was turned into 10 days. And then the 10 days turned into no days. That the deadline came and went. No one talking about anything. And now that instead of talking about, I'm requiring a 30-day ceasefire, now he's just saying, let's get together and talk, and we'll just sound each other out. So even Trump's own objectives in what this round is supposed to accomplish are different, almost depending on what day we're talking about. So that's not something that's going to cause disruption, because it's just going to cause confusion, and it's not going to result in anything that's positive for any side, I don't think.
One of the things that has been reported by the Times newspaper is that a West Bank style model had been discussed by Steve Witkoff in his meeting with the Russians. The suggestion that the Ukraine's own territorial boundaries wouldn't technically change, but a different administration, a Russian administration, would be responsible for the areas that Russia has already taken. What do you think of that model?
Obviously, I'm not privy to what was actually said behind the scenes when Witkoff went to talk to Putin, but I would be shocked if the Russians were even willing to entertain something like that, because again, their requirements are very, very specific. And to go into a situation where Gaza style, number one, that's a really bad template to use, because that's been going just terrible for decades of inconsistent and no end, and nobody knows what the status of anybody is, and there's violence all the time. So not exactly the template you want to try to get to. But from the Russian side, we'll look at that first. They've said, listen, it's already in our constitution. That's what they said just on Wednesday. They reiterated this. This is already our territory, and it's not subject to negotiation or giving away or anything else like that. So the idea that they would allow that to be a nebulous kind of thing that would be not really theirs, I don't think they would even contemplate it. Meanwhile, on the Ukrainian side, you also have Zelensky saying it's in our constitution that this is what it is, and we're not going to give it away to something nebulous. So it seems to me that both parties are citing their own constitutions and saying that they would not be willing to do that kind of thing. So I don't understand what the objective would be and why Steve Witkoff thought that would be a good idea. Again, maybe something happened in that conversation where the Russians said we would think about it. I almost hope so, because otherwise I'm not sure why anyone would think that's going to work when both sides are opposed to it.
And that is exactly why this meeting, there is so much fear around it, given there are only going to be two men in the room, and they may well come out of it with completely different perceptions or different narratives of what has happened. Who is in the stronger position, in your view, at the moment going into that meeting? Is it Donald Trump or is it President Putin?
Well, this is black and white. This is the one place where there's no confusion. It is unequivocally the Russian side, and you're seeing that play out on the battlefield right now, because for all of Russia's significant advantages in the air, in drones, well, drones are close to a parity, but certainly not in artillery, in glide bombs, in air power itself, air defense, munitions production, military industrial capacity. All of those are definitely on the Russian advantages, but the biggest one is the manpower pool. Ukraine is suffering more losses each month than they can force mobilize to bring in. Those that they bring are of relatively low quality. There's also reportedly up to 500 desertions per month, or maybe it's even less period than that, but there's a large number of desertions that are plaguing the Ukrainian military. And now then you're seeing it. Julian Rupka was talking about this, has several times over the last month or so, that the density of the Ukrainian troops is too small. There's too few of them to defend too big of an area, and there's going to be naturally gaps. And now we see north of Pokrovsk, where the Russians made the biggest breakthrough they've had in 2 full years of fighting, and they're trying to expand that bridgehead right now. And if they punch through that, it could be really, really trouble for the Ukraine side. You're not going to be able to reverse those things, even if they're able to use their last strategic reserve of the Azov Corps to stop that up. That's it. That's all you've got. And the dynamics are just going to keep growing on the Russian side. So in terms of who has the wherewithal and who is in the dominant position, it is absolutely Russia.
But in terms of the two men walking into that meeting, between President Trump and President Putin, and given everything you've just said, which of those two is in the stronger position?
Well, because of all the physical attributes are on the Russian side, it has to, by definition, go to the Russian side. Trump may be thinking he's, coming in with this force of personality, which a lot of people attribute to him, but force of personality doesn't go very far if you don't have the physical means to compel the other side to take your position here. And so that's why, and I think that President Trump and the administration have been signaling this. Last Sunday, you had the Vice President, J.D. Vance, who said, we're done funding this stuff here. If Ukraine and Europe want to continue doing it, that's fine. We just want this war to come to an end. I think that was a pretty strong signal that President Trump, if he doesn't get something he likes here, may eventually, yes, he may throw some sanctions on. I think he already knows that that's meaningless at this point. I think that then there is a real risk that, I know this worries a lot in Europe, that he could just say, you guys got it. Yeah, good luck to you. We're out of the game here. And I think that is probably what scares a lot of Europe, and I think maybe one of the more likely outcomes.
Do you think that is the most likely outcome of this meeting?
It almost has to be, because the European side, the Ukraine side, and the American side all together, we don't have anything to compel Russia to do anything that they don't want to do. So when you're talking about negotiations, it's all about who's got the power dynamics. Russia does have the capacity to say, no, this is what we're going to take. You either give it to us in negotiations or we will take it on the battlefield. And they're now demonstrating that they have the wherewithal to do that. So if the Western side writ large doesn't want to comply to that because they don't like it, then that by default means they are choosing to have their army, the Ukraine army, continue to ground down. And I'm just telling you, at some point, it's a mathematical calculation that they're going to have a collapse somewhere that they can't heal, and Ukraine could literally lose the war.
I just want to ask you finally about American public opinion, because many people say that that is important to Donald Trump. In America, what is the perception of who your country should be supporting here? Is it Russia? Is it Ukraine? What's the feeling? What's the mood about this conflict?
Yeah, the overall sympathy is unequivocally for Ukraine. There's no question about that at all. But now, after 3.5 years, and seeing that the previous administration, held almost nothing back and gave all this stuff, and then now Trump has been given all of these things, that he has been keeping the pipeline open from the Biden situation. People are saying enough is enough, and it's just not going to work. There's no reason to keep throwing good money. And, when you have a lot of issues like we're cutting Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security is at risk, et cetera, people are losing money. They're like, hey, I'm not in on sending my money to Ukraine when it won't even do anything anyway. So more and more people are getting to that. And in fact, a lot of Trump supporters voted for him because he said he was going to end this war in a day. And they're like saying, okay, that day is a long time, and they're getting a little bit antsy, and they'd like to see it come to an end.
Daniel L. Davis, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Always my pleasure. Thanks for the invite.